In 1713, a young law student in Italy woke in the middle of the night to the sound of music that did not exist. According to letters preserved in private archives near Padua, he claimed a dark figure stood at the foot of his bed. Not a monster, not a shadow, something shaped like a man.
Lord, have
Calm,
mercy on me.
patient,
Guide me in your
watching.
truth. I
That
seek
young
your
man
light.
would later become known to history as Giuseppe Tartini. But the music he heard that night would cost him everything. Giuseppe Tartini was born in 1692 in the Republic of Venice. Church records describe him as intelligent, disciplined, and deeply religious. His father wanted him to become a Franciscan monk.
Composition!
Instead,
Why
Tartini
won't you
chose
deal with
law.
me? I
By
must
his
master
early
this!
20s, he was studying
Focus.
in Padua,
Let the
a
music
city
guide you.
known for
I'm trying,
scholarship
sir. It's
and
difficult.
strict Catholic
Breathe. Now
tradition.
begin.
Those who knew him described him as serious, reserved. He avoided taverns and social circles. He practiced fencing obsessively and kept detailed journals of his thoughts. Nothing in those early accounts
Tell me what
suggests
you
instability.
know. You
Then
don't
came
understand
the
the
dream.
danger. I
According
must
to Tartini's
know. It will
own written
consume us all.
testimony, dated several
Exorcizamos
years
de omnis
later,
immundo spiritus.
he dreamed that he had made a
Audite fugare
pact
Deo
with the devil.
corpora.
The devil appeared in human form
Focus.
and asked
Let
to
the
be his
music
servant.
guide you.
I'm
In the
trying, sir.
dream,
It's difficult.
Tartini
Breathe. Now
handed him
begin.
his violin and commanded him to play something beautiful. What followed, he wrote, was music so perfect, so powerful, that he woke in terror. He immediately reached for his violin, desperate to capture what he had heard. He tried to recreate the melody. The result would later be known as the Devil's Trill Sonata. Music historians debate the accuracy of the story, but church correspondences from the time confirm something else entirely. After this dream, Giuseppe Tartini changed. Witnesses later reported that he became withdrawn. He stopped attending social gatherings. He practiced for hours without eating. Neighbors claimed they heard violent, frantic music echoing from his quarters deep into the night. One fellow student wrote in a letter, "Giuseppe speaks of sound as if it were a spirit that resists him." That phrase appears again and again in various accounts. A spirit that resists him. Within months, Tartini abandoned his legal career. He fled Padua and took refuge in a monastery in Assisi. Official records list it as a spiritual retreat. However, an unsigned note preserved in diocesan archives suggests he sought protection from troubling nocturnal visitations. In Assisi, he began studying theology and advanced violin technique. Monks reported that he would kneel in the chapel long after midnight, whispering prayers no one could hear clearly. One monk, Brother Matteo, later wrote in his journal that Tartini confessed to seeing the same figure again, not in dreams, but standing in the corner of his cell as he practiced. He did not describe flames. He did not describe horns or grotesque features. He described a man in dark clothing with pale hands. And he claimed the figure corrected his posture. Brother Matteo initially dismissed this as exhaustion. Tartini was known to practice 10 or 12 hours a day. But then something else happened. According to monastery records, Tartini's violin began to sound different. Visitors attending private recitals described tones that felt unnatural. Notes that seemed to vibrate beneath the skin rather than in the air. One priest stated that certain harmonies caused him to feel physically ill. Still, Tartini's reputation grew. By 1721, he was appointed as first violinist at the Basilica of St. Anthony in Padua. Official appointment documents praise his unearthly mastery of intonation. It was during this period that he composed the piece inspired by the dream, the Devil's Trill Sonata. Modern listeners describe the piece as technically demanding but musically beautiful, but early witnesses described it differently. According to correspondence between clergy members, several priests expressed concern over the final movement. They claimed the trills and double stops produced a disturbing resonance inside the church walls. One account states that during a private performance, a candle near the altar extinguished itself mid-phrase. No draft was detected. Tartini reportedly smiled when it happened. As years passed, his obsession deepened. He began speaking openly about the interval of the third sound. In lectures, he described hearing a third tone when two notes were played together, what we now understand as combination tones. But in private letters, he referred to it as the hidden voice. According to a letter addressed to a colleague in Venice, Tartini wrote, "There is always another tone beneath the two. It is not imagined. It waits." Friends began distancing themselves. Servants working in his household reported that he would wake abruptly at night and tune his violin with trembling hands. One servant claimed he heard Tartini speaking in Italian and then in a language he did not recognize. Medical explanations were considered. A physician examined him in 1735. Notes from that examination describe mild insomnia and signs of nervous agitation, but no evidence of psychosis. Yet something continued to deteriorate. Tartini sold several family properties during this time. Financial records show sudden liquidations without clear reason. When asked why he needed money, he reportedly told an associate, "I must find the source." The source of what? No one knew. He began traveling extensively. Venice, Prague, Vienna. He attended performances, studied church acoustics, and spent hours in cathedrals alone. Witnesses described him standing in empty halls, striking two strings and listening intently, as if waiting for something to answer. A former student later testified that Tartini believed certain buildings amplified unseen frequencies. In 1740, a disturbing report surfaced. During a rehearsal in Padua, several choir members claimed that Tartini suddenly stopped playing and stared toward the far end of the nave. His hands froze mid-performance. He whispered, "Not here." Then he walked out. According to church documentation, Tartini requested permission to perform a private vigil inside the basilica at night. The request was denied. Shortly afterward, he left the city for several months, without explanation. It was during this absence that rumors intensified. In Vienna, an innkeeper's log mentions a distinguished violinist who insisted on a room facing the church tower. The innkeeper later claimed the man complained of footsteps on the roof above him, though no one else heard anything. Back in Italy, Tartini's letters grew darker. One preserved fragment reads, "The melody is incomplete because I do not know its master. I must see him clearly." By the 1750s, Tartini had become a legend in European music circles. Students traveled great distances to study under him. He founded a violin school that emphasized discipline and mathematical precision in sound. Yet behind this public success, private accounts tell another story. A student named Carlo wrote that Tartini would sometimes grip his shoulder painfully and ask, "Do you hear it too?" beneath the notes. Carlo claimed he did not. Tartini would then become visibly agitated, as if betrayed. Several clergy members documented increasing concern. While they acknowledged his piety, they worried about his fixation on invisible tones and nocturnal visitors. Statement. In 1757, an official church inquiry was opened quietly, not to accuse him of heresy, but to evaluate his mental stability. The attending priest, Father Lorenzo Bianchi, met with Tartini over several weeks. Surviving notes from those meetings describe Tartini as lucid but obsessed. Father Bianchi recorded one particularly unsettling statement. He says the figure has returned. He believes it is neither angel nor devil, but something bound to sound itself. When asked whether he feared it, Tartini reportedly answered, "No, I fear losing it." That distinction troubled the priest. Over the next year, Tartini withdrew further from society. He sold more possessions. A small estate near Venice, jewelry inherited from his mother, even rare manuscripts. Financial ledgers show that much of the money was unaccounted for. Witnesses later reported that he paid individuals to access abandoned chapels and crypts. He spent nights alone inside them, playing sustained intervals and listening for echoes. One caretaker of a ruined church claimed he heard two violins playing, though Tartini had arrived alone. In 1761, a final documented incident occurred that would mark the beginning of his decline. During a masterclass, Tartini instructed a student to hold a double stop, two notes played simultaneously. As the sound resonated through the hall, Tartini began to tremble. According to 3 witnesses, he whispered, "He is closer now." The student lowered his bow, confused. Tartini screamed at him to continue. The vibration intensified. Several students later described feeling pressure in their ears, as if altitude had suddenly changed. Then Tartini collapsed. He regained consciousness minutes later, but something in him had shifted. Father Bianchi was summoned again.
Lord,
This time,
have mercy on me.
Tartini
Guide
did
me
not
in your
speak of
truth.
hidden
I
tones.
seek your light.
He spoke of a promise. He claimed that decades earlier, in the dream that inspired the Sonata, he had agreed to something. Not wealth, not fame, understanding. He believed the figure had given him a fragment of music in exchange for his lifelong pursuit of the rest. The priest urged him to renounce the vision and
This
cease the
infernal
obsession.
composition!
Tartini
Why
refused.
did you and me?
In
I must master
1764,
this!
at the age of
Focus.
72,
Let the music guide you.
Giuseppe
I'm trying, sir.
Tartini
It's
died in
difficult.
Padua.
Breathe. Now
Official
begin.
cause: illness related to age. But what happened in the final weeks of his life is recorded in 3 separate testimonies that were sealed for nearly a century. According to his housekeeper, Tartini stopped playing publicly.
Tell me
Instead,
what you know.
he locked himself
You don't
inside his
understand the
study
danger.
at night.
I must
She reported
know.
hearing
It will
low,
consume us all.
sustained notes repeating for
Exorcizamos de
hours
omnis
without
immundos
variation.
spiritus.
One
Audi
evening,
de fugare del
she
corpo.
claimed the sound did not stop even when she knocked on the
Focus.
door.
Let the music
When
guide
she
you.
finally
I'm trying,
entered the
sir.
room,
It's difficult.
she
Breathe.
found
Now
Tartini
begin.
standing motionless. His violin was resting on the table, yet the final note still vibrated in the air. She swore she heard a second tone layered beneath it. Not louder, just deeper. And when Tartini finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and trembling. "He has found me." The next morning, Father Bianchi arrived at the house after receiving a frantic message. He later wrote that Tartini appeared terrified, not of death, but of silence. The priest began reciting prayers. As the Latin words filled the room, Tartini clutched his chest and stared toward the corner of the study. His eyes tracked something moving slowly along the wall. Father Bianchi later testified that he felt an intense pressure in the air, similar to standing near a powerful organ pipe. Then Tartini raised his shaking hand and whispered, "Play." There was no instrument in his hand. No one else in the room. But according to the priest's sworn account, a faint trill began to echo from somewhere above them. Thin, persistent, and impossibly precise. The sound did not come from the violin on the table. It came from the empty space near the ceiling. Father Bianchi continued praying, louder now. The trill intensified. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Tartini exhaled once, and his body went still. When the priest approached the violin resting on the table, he noticed something that was never explained in any official report. 2 strings were vibrating, gently, as if freshly played. Father Lorenzo Bianchi would later insist that no draft moved through the study. The windows were sealed. The shutters were closed. The air felt heavy, compressed, almost metallic in his lungs. Yet the 2 strings continued to tremble long after Tartini's body had gone cold. According to the priest's sealed testimony, he placed his hand over the instrument to still the vibration. He did not touch the strings directly. He simply hovered his palm above them, as if blessing them. The vibration slowed, but it did not stop immediately. He wrote that the faint third tone, the one Tartini had spoken of for decades, lingered even after the physical movement ceased. A sound without movement. A resonance without source. Church authorities documented the event carefully, but privately. Tartini's public legacy as a composer and violin master was too important to stain with rumors of obsession. His burial proceeded with dignity inside Padua. Official statements made no mention of unusual occurrences. But the private testimonies did not end with his death. Within weeks, 2 of his former students reported similar experiences. Carlo, now an established musician himself, claimed that while practicing the Devil's Trill Sonata alone in his home, he felt an unexpected resistance in the bow, as if something pressed back against his movement. He wrote to another former student, describing a sudden third tone emerging beneath the trill, louder than he had ever produced before. He stopped playing immediately. The tone continued for several seconds. Then silence. Carlo burned that letter after receiving no reply. The second report came from Vienna. A violinist who had briefly studied under Tartini claimed that during a late rehearsal inside a small chapel, he heard a second instrument echoing his phrases precisely, but slightly delayed, as if learning him, When he stopped playing, the echo continued alone. He never performed the sonata again. These accounts were dismissed publicly as hysteria or grief. Tartini had been a dominant presence in their lives. It was natural, some said, that his students felt haunted by his influence. But Father Bianchi did not dismiss them. He had heard the trill in that study. He had felt the pressure in the air. In 1765, 1 year after Tartini's death, the priest requested permission from his superiors to examine the composer's private journals more thoroughly. The request was granted quietly. What he found troubled him deeply. Tartini had documented his experiences with meticulous precision. Dates, locations, acoustic measurements of churches and chambers. He sketched diagrams of vaulted ceilings and calculated resonance patterns. But woven between these technical notes were passages that read like confessions. One entry described standing alone in an abandoned chapel outside Venice. Tartini wrote that he played a sustained interval and heard the hidden tone respond, with intention. Another passage reads, "The figure does not command. It waits. It offers correction." He believed the entity was not a demon in the traditional sense, not a tempter promising pleasure or power. It was something bound to structure, to harmony, something that required his pursuit as much as he required its music. In one of his final entries, dated only weeks before his death, he wrote, "I have sold what I own to remove all distraction. Possessions anchor the ear to the earth. I must listen without weight." Financial records confirm that by the end of his life, Tartini had divested nearly all personal property. The proceeds remain largely untraceable. Father Bianchi concluded that Tartini's obsession had crossed into spiritual danger long before his final illness. He prepared a private report recommending that the Devil's Trill Sonata be restricted from performance within church spaces. The recommendation was not officially adopted. The piece had already spread throughout Europe. In the decades that followed, reports surfaced sporadically. In 1789, a French violinist reportedly fainted mid-performance of the sonata, claiming he felt fingers guiding his own. In 1812, a small parish in northern Italy temporarily banned the piece after parishioners complained of discomfort during its execution. Most of these incidents were brief, easily rationalized, until 1847. That year, a young seminarian in Bologna wrote to his bishop requesting spiritual counsel. He described an unusual fixation on Tartini's writings after discovering a copy of his treatise on harmony. The seminarian claimed he began experimenting with sustained double stops late at night inside the seminary chapel. At first, he heard only the expected acoustic phenomena, but after several weeks, he reported perceiving a third voice that modulated independently of his bow. He described it not as a tone, but as articulation. The bishop ordered the practice to cease immediately. The seminarian complied, but weeks later, he was found in the chapel after midnight, kneeling before the altar, whispering, "Correct me." No instrument was present. The church archives record that the young man was transferred quietly to another region. The matter was never publicized. By the late 19th century, Tartini's legend had become romanticized. The dream of the devil was treated as artistic metaphor, a dramatic flourish to explain creative genius. Scholars dismissed the supernatural framing as superstition. Yet Father Bianchi's sealed testimony remained in diocesan custody. In 1903, during routine archival reorganization, a young archivist named Pietro Salvati encountered the sealed documents. Salvati was educated, skeptical, and fascinated by historical curiosities. He requested access to the testimonies under the pretext of academic research. Permission was granted. According to Salvati's own later notes, he initially regarded the accounts as examples of collective suggestion. He believed Tartini suffered from an auditory fixation amplified by religious culture. Still, he felt compelled to test the phenomenon himself. Salvati was not a trained violinist, but he had basic musical education. He obtained a copy of the Devil's Trill Sonata and arranged to use a small rehearsal room within the seminary grounds after hours. He wrote that the first attempts were unimpressive. The piece was technically difficult. His execution was clumsy, but he persisted. Weeks passed. He began focusing not on melody, but on the sustained trills Tartini had emphasized. He attempted to isolate the combination tones scientifically. Then, in his private journal dated October 12, 1903, Salvati recorded something unexpected. I heard it clearly tonight, a tone not produced by my fingers. It emerged when I held the interval longer than comfort allows. He admitted the possibility of acoustic illusion, yet he returned the following night. This time, he described a sensation of anticipation in the room before he even began playing. He hesitated, then he drew the bow. The third tone appeared sooner, stronger. He wrote that it seemed to align itself precisely between the two strings, as if occupying a mathematical space. Then he stopped playing. The tone sustained for nearly 3 seconds beyond the bow's movement. Salvati did not tell anyone, but his journal entries became increasingly erratic over the following month. He described dreams of a man standing beside a lectern, adjusting his grip on the violin. He described waking to the sensation of fingers tapping lightly on wood near his bed. On November 3rd, 1903, Salvati failed to appear for morning duties. He was discovered in the rehearsal room. The violin lay on the floor. No sign of violence. He was conscious but unresponsive, staring toward the upper corner of the ceiling. When questioned later, he reportedly whispered, "It is not evil. It is incomplete." Church officials sealed his journals alongside Tartini's documents. The pattern was difficult to ignore. None of the individuals involved described grotesque visions. None spoke of possession in the traditional sense. Instead, they described pursuit, correction, and intelligence embedded within sound. In the 20th century, interest in Tartini's acoustic theories resurfaced academically. Physicists studied combination tones in laboratories. Musicians performed the Devil's Trill Sonata worldwide without widespread incident. Yet, isolated reports persisted. In 1938, during a private recital in Prague, a violinist allegedly halted mid-performance after claiming the resonance in the hall shifted against him. In 1962, an audio engineer analyzing a recording of the sonata noted an unexplained harmonic fluctuation beneath a sustained trill. He attributed it to equipment distortion. But in his private notebook, he added a single line, "The fluctuation seems responsive." By modern standards, these accounts lack empirical proof. They rely on testimony, perception, suggestion, but the consistency is unsettling. Each witness describes not a monstrous apparition, but a presence linked to precision, a force that manifests only when the interval is held beyond comfort, when attention becomes obsession. Today, Giuseppe Tartini is remembered as a brilliant composer. The Devil's Trill Sonata remains part of advanced violin repertoire. Concert halls applaud its technical brilliance. Few performers know of Father Bianchi's testimony. Fewer still know of Salvati. The sealed documents remain archived, accessible only under special permission. According to a modern diocesan official who reviewed them in the early 2000s, the Church never formally classified Tartini's case as demonic. Instead, it labeled it a cautionary account of spiritual fixation. Because what made Tartini's story disturbing was not a single dramatic event. It was the slow erosion of boundaries. He did not summon something deliberately. He pursued understanding. He sold his possessions to remove distraction. He isolated himself to hear more clearly. He believed the third tone was evidence of deeper truth. And in the final hours of his life, he did not beg for deliverance. He asked it to play. There is one final detail recorded by Father Bianchi that was not included in official summaries. After Tartini's death, the priest ordered the violin to be inspected carefully before burial. He expected to find structural anomalies, perhaps loosened strings, hidden mechanisms. Instead, the instrument appeared ordinary, except for one subtle mark, carved lightly into the wood near the chin rest. A small symbol, almost invisible unless angled toward the light. It was not a cross. It was not a name. It resembled two parallel lines connected by a thin arc between them. An interval. The priest claimed the carving had not been present during earlier visits. No explanation was ever offered. The violin was preserved for a time, then passed through various collectors. Its current location is debated among historians. Some believe it rests in a private European collection. Others claim it was lost during wartime. But according to a confidential report filed in 1997 by a music conservatory in northern Italy, an instrument attributed to Tartini was briefly examined for authentication. The examiner noted unusual resonance properties. He also noted a faint carving near the chin rest, two parallel lines, connected by an arc. When asked about it during a recorded interview years later, the examiner paused for several seconds before answering. He said he had attempted to replicate Tartini's documented interval technique in a controlled studio. He described feeling a pressure change in the room, a vibration that did not match the instrument's output. He ended the interview abruptly. The recording captured one final detail before it cut off: a thin, sustained trill in the background. Not loud, just beneath the audible threshold. Perfectly steady. And continuing after the microphone was switched off.